Hi, I hope you're having a good time at the Algolia DevCon. The day is almost over, so what about we take a sidestep from all the intensity before we wrap up? A quick word about me. I'm Sarah Dayan. I work as a staff software engineer in the front-end experiences team at Algolia. And as you will quickly notice, I pronounce the word experience every 5 minutes. User experience, developer experience. This is a common obsession in our team and at Algolia. So much that we created a podcast dedicated to developer experience. Guess how we called it? I know. We got a bit bold with the name. We've been running the Developer Experience podcast for over a year now, and we've been lucky to welcome fantastic guests with incredible insights on what developer experience is, what it should be, and how to be really excellent at it. But first things first, what is developer experience? We discussed it in episode 1, and Adam Wathen from Tailwind Labs gave us this great primer. Developer experience is paying attention to what people are struggling with and finding ways to get people over those hurdles. I love the example that Adam gave to illustrate this. He talked about Kathy Sierra's Badass book. She talks about how to make a great camera. And it's not about all the elaborate features you can add to the camera. It's about what you have to do to make sure that when someone takes a photo with this camera, they are so proud of the photo that they took. It feels like, they did it, and it doesn't even feel like the tool should get the credit. It feels like they achieved this outcome and the tool only helped them get there. Basically, you want to give people superpowers. When you make things for people who make things, what are the decisions that you can take to make someone feel like they're kick-ass at the problem that they're trying to solve? But also, how can you do it without them even noticing that the tool is enabling this? As Adam puts it, developer experience is not about trying to get credit. It is just about focusing on how you can make someone feel competent and successful. Lee Robinson from Vercel brought it home on this same episode by underlining how crucial it is to obsess about the feeling that you're leaving. People might not necessarily remember the outcome of what they built, but the feeling that was left over. Did they love the tool? Did they hate it? Did it make them feel smart or dumb? Did it empower them and fuel their creativity? Or did it deplete their energy figuring things out? This largely contributes to how you decide whether or not you'll use something again. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like the common denominator here is care. Care is one of the 5 values that we have at Algolia, and it is really the fuel cell of delivering great experience. So as Adam said on the show, when you have really great developer experience, it's always rooted in teams that think very deeply about design, teams who care deeply and stress over essential details that others might not want to spend so much time on. And this is one of the key points of the accessibility episode that we recorded with Kitty Girodel, who built and led engineering team at Gorillas and N26. And the best thing that they found to build teams who care about diversity, inclusion, and accessibility is hiring people who already care. Because you know what? Trying to convince people that they have to care usually does not work. Developer experience and accessibility are often presented as conflicting principles, as if, caring about one would inevitably hurt the other. And a common criticism of accessibility is that it requires a lot more work and that not everyone can afford spending so much extra time making a product accessible. But I love this quote from Hayden Pickering that Kitty has on their blog. Accessibility is not about doing more work, but about doing the right work. It is not accessibility that is costly. It is having to retrofit accessibility in products further down the road. Kitty describes accessibility and security as similar problems. They're both about software quality, with risks and significant problems down the line when they're done wrong. So you see more and more companies hiring security and site reliability teams early on to create, a culture of safety, they request recurring independent security audits and many more perfectly justified measures. But it's a lot more rare to see such a deeply ingrained culture of building accessible software and ensuring that the quality does not lower over time. But whether it's about building teams or doing the work, the common denominator of success is to do it by design. If accessibility is a first class citizen in your organization, it will not be such a pain to fit it into your process and it will lead to less friction. And speaking of software quality, if there is a topic that is dear to my heart, it is documentation. So you might not know this about me unless you started stalking me on LinkedIn while watching this session, but I started at Algolia as an engineer in the documentation team. And no matter how well crafted, thoughtfully designed, reliable, yet delightful your product is, it does not stand a chance if it does not have great documentation. And if you do not believe me, believe Adam Wathan, who created one of the most successful and fast growing CSS framework out there. We discussed documentation on another episode because the guy cannot get away from the podcast. And he said that documentation is the most important thing for the success of any open source project. Unless you're doing something that there are no alternatives to, the way that you compete is on developer experience. And documentation is a huge part of that. If people cannot be successful with your tool, they'll get frustrated, they'll stop using it, and they will move on to the next one. It's not like there is a shortage of software and SaaS products out there. But once you know that, where do you even begin? What does good documentation even means, right? So one aspect that we discussed is that when you look at docs that most people consider great, they're often extremely handcrafted. And Adam explains that a mistake that he sees people make often is to focus on trying to explain how things work with their tool instead of focusing on what problem users are actually trying to solve. So if the solution to doing X with your tool is Y, nobody knows to look for Y in the docs. All they know is that they're trying to solve problem X. So your documentation, it's not just a manual or a description of your product. It is education on how it should and could be used. Users want solutions to their problems, and they want to know how to do things right. It takes time and skill to craft something like this, far beyond an API reference generated from source code. And speaking of skills, invest in your writing skills. Writing is hard. Communicating ideas is hard. It takes mastery. Not because you can compose a sentence means that you can write well. According to Adam, the absolute hardest thing is the information architecture of the documentation. In his own words, the hardest work he's ever done in his life. He makes a difference between documenting and teaching. Just writing down how something works is not enough for the documentation experience to be really great. You need to empathize with the problems that people are trying to solve. Explain how your tool solves them, predict problems that someone is going to run into, and just really think about things from the other person's point of view. Another take from Adam that I really love is that the worst thing you can do, especially when you have a broad audience and you're trying to address everyone at once, is to average it out. So there's a great story on that topic. So back in the 40s, the US Air Force had a serious problems. Pilots could not keep control of their planes and kept on crashing at an alarming rate. After multiple inquiries with no outcome, they started looking into the design of the cockpit. And so back in 1926, the Army designed the first cockpit, right? And they measured the physical dimensions of hundreds of male pilots and used the data to standardize the dimensions of the cockpit. So everything in the cockpit, from the size and the shape of the seat, the distance between the pedals and the stick, even the shape of the helmets, was designed to conform to the average dimensions of a 1926 pilot. So many hypotheses were made, including that pilots might have gotten bigger over time. But one engineer who majored in physical anthropology had observed during his studies that when it comes to body dimensions, averages were always useless, or almost. When measuring multiple hands, for example, even from very similar people, similar traits, similar backgrounds, similar ethnicities, no individual hand ever resembled the average hand. So he decided to gather measurements from over 4,000 pilots, then average them out and find out if the average pilot really did exist. And out of all the pilots that he measured, none of them fit the average range on all dimensions. There was no such thing as an average pilot. If you've designed a cockpit to fit the average pilot, you've actually designed it to fit no one. There is no average developer either. There is no average user. This person does not exist. If your audience is composed of a broad range of people, beginners, experts, technical and non technical people, the solution to address them all at once is not to write something that somewhat meets everyone halfway. It is crucial to try and write documentation for a specific person. Otherwise, you end up writing documentation for nobody. Now, I could really spend 2 hours telling you all about the super smart stuff that our guests have said during all past 10 episodes, but I've been told I only have 15 minutes, and the people behind the camera are making some big signs to urge me to wrap this up. This is not true, by the way. I'm just sitting alone talking to myself. But time is running out, so I'd love to wrap this up with thoughts from our guest on what is great developer experience. We ask this question at the end of every episode, and we received some excellent answers. In episode 6 on the role of community in developer experience, Cassidy Williams defined great DX as time to hello world. How fast can a developer get to a very basic understanding and get something running? If you're able to get someone up and running quickly, then they can take it and run with it. In episode 5 on collaboration and remote work, Yves Van Horn from CodeSandbox recommended to build for 2 flows, the accessible flow and the power user flow. He defines the accessible flow as the one that someone needs when they do not know about the feature, or they are looking for the feature but they do not really know where to find it. This flow needs to focus on intuition and known patterns. And then the power user flow is for someone who knows about the feature and needs it constantly, so it needs to be as fast as possible. So this flow focuses more on muscle memory and efficiency. And as people use your tool, they get more familiar with them and can slowly progress from accessible flows to power user flows. And this is a big enjoyment to feel smart in knowing how to quickly use your tool of trade. And what a better way to wrap it up than this excellent quote by Jason Langstor from Netlify on episode 10. Great developer experience is using tools that feel like they're not here. We all want to build something. We have an idea, or a problem to solve, and we want to get there as quickly as possible. And every time we trip on an error or we wrestle with the tool to make it work, we're no longer trying to get to our solution. We're trying to clear roadblocks in front of our solution. It becomes all about the tool, and worse, the tool not working, and no longer about your goals. Tools with great DX are the ones that make users look good and know when to disappear. So I'm leaving you right now for the final session, but my team and I will be back tomorrow for live coding workshops. Daya and I will both show you how to integrate an Algolia search and discovery experience into an existing storefront. I will do it in React and Next.js, and Daya will do it in vanilla JavaScript in the Laravel project. And if you're not into web and JavaScript, no worries. We are big on native as well. Vlad and Muad will demonstrate how to build a cross-platform search experience with Algolia and Flutter. Thank you very much. And if you want to chat, you can find me on Twitter. Have a wonderful end of this first day of Algolia DevCon, and I will see you tomorrow at the workshop.